Eritu ano to obunaru fata aniro anna fatadam. Eritu ano to obunaru fata aniro anna fatadam.
Brandon is a deaf boy in our village. He could only barely communicate through hand signals or waving his arms, and he was my boy's best friend. Our tribal language is particularly difficult, even by Papua New Guinea standards. So my boys, even after years of living in the village, are not able to understand it or speak it. But my boys didn't have to worry about that with Brandon. They could climb trees together, play soccer, catch bugs. None of those activities required speaking or hearing. Brandon was the perfect friend for my boys. But something always broke my heart about Brandon's situation. The other kids wouldn't use his name, but they would grunt like he did while trying to speak in place of his name, to try to get Brandon's attention. They'd laugh at him when he didn't understand what was happening, and it wasn't just the kids, it was the adults too, it was everyone. There aren't accommodations made for a deaf person in this society. In the jungle, there's no developed sign language or special care for his well-being. Saying he is bullied is an understatement. He was defective, incomplete, useless. And watching him treated as subhuman day after day, it grated on me. Brandon was kind and gentle, the only kid we didn't have to watch like hawks when our boys went outside to play. When no one else was looking too, we would sometimes sneak Brandon some extra food or toys. But everything he got from us was stolen from him if he couldn't hide it quickly enough. But my boys then gave Brandon something that couldn't be stolen. They taught him how to play checkers. Brandon would come by the house almost every afternoon and ask to play. My boys would sit under the house with him and teach him, and soon Brandon got good. And not just pretty good, but really good. As a kid, I played checkers with my Uncle Tom, who had no mercy on us. And I'm no checkers slouch. But it got to the point where Brandon could beat myself or my boys about 50% of the time. Other people would even come out just to watch Brandon play. He was like the pinball wizard, fully deaf, couldn't speak, but he sure played a mean game of checkers. And after a few years of watching Brandon mistreated like this, I then decided to try something. It was a risk, but to me it seemed like the kind of thing that Jesus might do. So I announced a checkers tournament to the village. Saturday we will have a tournament open to all to find the champion of checkers, I announced. The winner will receive these bags of rice, these cans of tuna fish, and these packets of noodles. Eyes grew wide and everyone rushed to sign themselves up for the tournament. The morning of the tournament, I brought down my dry erase board under the house and I drew up all the brackets. Both kids, adults, teens, women, everyone, tons of people signed up. We had 2 checkerboards, those big fabric ones from Cracker Barrel. The rules of the game were already understood, people had been playing for months, and I made sure to announce that helping was not allowed. Only the person playing could decide where to move his pieces, no one could point or give anyone else advice or warnings. Once we started, the whole village gathered, and there were 2 groups of about 40 people each, tightly surrounding each checkers board, crowding in for a look. There were cheers and gasps when pieces were lost. People regularly clapped their hands over their mouth when someone didn't notice a piece about to be lost. The teens were particularly good. They had been under the house also, playing daily for months. Most of the adults weren't very good, and the adults were out in the first few rounds. Finally, it was only some teens left and Brandon, the only kid. In the semifinal round, Brandon was playing against a teen. The adults and other teens weren't about to let Brandon win, so they cheated regularly, warning Brandon's opponent about dangers. I corrected them each time and threatened to forfeit Brandon's opponent if I heard someone else cheating. Then they tried subtly to cough or grunt to warn of danger. Why? Because something was happening that was upsetting the village social hierarchy. A kid like Brandon doesn't deserve honor, doesn't deserve to win. He's defective, less than human. It was all backwards in their minds. Brandon won the semifinal game and made it to the championship game. If the village had tried to cheat in the semifinals, they tried twice as hard in the championship game. It was Brandon against an older, pretty sharp teen. There was a lot on the line, not just the rice, noodles, and tuna fish. No, this was about reputation, honor, being the sole winner with the whole village watching. Brandon started the game strong but fell behind. I could see him wiping sweat off his forehead. And I tried to avoid praying for sporting events, but I was praying like mad. God, please give Brandon this victory, if only for a few moments. Let him know what it feels like to be honored, to be respected. Flip this oppressive social system on its head, if only for a day. Let Brandon be like the Samaritan woman, from shame to honor, like Zacchaeus, shame to honor. Brandon was down to 2 kings, and his opponent had 4 kings. Things weren't looking good. Second place is nothing to sneeze at, I thought. And then Brandon slid a king between 2 of his opponent's kings in open water and took one of them. He was still down, but his opponent only had 1 more king than Brandon. Brandon kept the middle of the board and stayed alive. He dodged and maneuvered until his opponent made another mistake, and Brandon took another of his opponent's kings. 2 kings to 2 kings, even score. The crowd pressed in. Brandon controlled the center of the board again, then slowly drove his opponent's kings to the walls. Finally, they were each pinned. With nowhere else to go, his opponent gave up 1 king, and then gave up his final king. Game over. Brandon had won the tournament. A round of applause rang out. Brandon couldn't hear it, but he looked around and saw it with a big smile. He didn't look down in shame like he often did, but kept looking from face to face at the village applauding for him. I grabbed Brandon, pulled him in front of the crowd, lifted one of his arms, and announced his victory. The village cheered again. I picked him up, sat him on my shoulder, and ran half a lap around the house. I was yelling, "Brandon is the checkers king! Brandon is the checkers king! Brandon no joki wa noto obunaro due debe!" Everyone laughed at the spectacle, but kept cheering. When I put Brandon down, out of breath, he still wore a smile. I presented the 3rd and 2nd place with their smaller awards, and then I put the bags of rice, tuna, noodles in Brandon's arms, and he could barely hold it all. The kids his age quickly gathered to inspect all of his winnings, and then Brandon carried them off to his house, and the crowd dispersed. The next day, Saturday, the boys and I made Brandon his own checkers board that he could take home. We painted the checkered squares on some plywood, cut thin strips of a medium-sized tree for the pieces, painted half of them black. Later that day, when Brandon wandered back over to our house, we had a little trouble explaining that it was his, that he could take it home, but when he finally understood with a big smile, he ran home with his brand new checkers set. Brandon got his few moments of honor, and while it was brief, I think it was nothing short of the gospel at work, without words, without explanation, but it was a glimpse of what Jesus does for the shamed, for the lowly, for the spat upon and neglected. The angels didn't announce Jesus' birth in Herod's palace, but to the shepherds. Jesus didn't eat dinner with the synagogue leaders, but with the tax collectors and sinners. Jesus didn't choose the most honored Pharisees to be his disciples, but chose the rabbinical school dropouts, the tax collector, the zealot, the hothead, the formerly demon-possessed, those who no one else wanted. In all the world, few places are as isolated and forgotten as the tribes here in Papua New Guinea. There's no technology, no healthcare, no connection to the outside world out in the bush. Progress has passed them by. Modern conveniences are unheard of. And among the tribes in Papua New Guinea, Wabuku is small. It's the least populated village in our area and therefore looked down upon by other villages. We don't even live on the mighty Sepik River, but on an offshoot, a small river, only given a placeholder name on any PNG map. To be from Wabuku means to lack status, and within Wabuku there is one family below the rest. Mom is a dangerous, crazy lady, and Dad is a wannabe witch doctor. That family carries shame, even in Wabuku. And in that family of shame is their son Brandon, defective and disabled, the boy without a name. There's no one lower on the social totem pole than Brandon. But for a few moments he was elevated. He was called the boss, the king, and people applauded. They smiled and clapped for him instead of laughing and grunting at him. For a moment he was accepted instead of rejected. He was clothed in honor by his own village instead of stripped in shame. And that, friends, is what Jesus does for each one of us. When we believe his words, when we see that our sin makes us as helpless as Brandon to fix our own situation. Jesus put all of that shame on his own back and died on the cross. But he didn't just pay for our sins. He rose from the dead on day number 3. Launching new creation. Now those of us who have been forgiven are being made new, and one by one we're given this same new life, a life that cannot die. One day Jesus will return, and God will remake this world the way it was supposed to be. One day Jesus will return and finally reverse these corrupt, upside-down social systems that punish and neglect the outcast. And those of us who faithfully believe that Jesus is already King of this world, those of us who already go on living under that truth and who build and wait for this already and not yet kingdom, we will wear a smile on that day as big as Brandon's.